And here we are. It's Saturday evening in the UK and it's Saturday morning in San Francisco. And we are joined here today with Brenda Hartill, who is in Udimore, just outside Rye in the UK, and David Solomita, who is in the centre of San Francisco. And has just been telling us that really good news that the fires, the smoke seems to be under control now, and the fires seem to be under control in San Francisco. So that's a mighty relief, because that must be very scary. And we were just having, I wish we'd gone live a bit earlier, because we were just having quite an intense political conversation.
Conversation.
Which I think everyone would have really enjoyed. But we will cover that. Yeah, even Ted was listening. Ted's with us today. So, and he was enjoying it. So we will cover a bit more about that as we get into it today. But yeah, it's really fascinating to have people, from across the world. And I've really enjoyed this. Last Saturday we had Caroline Fraser coming from Vancouver. And she was telling us a bit about life in Vancouver, and I think artists all over the world are making art, and they're doing their thing, and they're helping everyone feel the love, because art makes us feel better at the end of the day, and the one thing we need right now is to feel better. So today I'm going to start the session off with Brenda, and David and I are going to sit down in the corner and be very, very well behaved. And well, we'll try. David does feel it in the inclination for a gin and tonic, even though it is only 9:30.
Yes, well, that's not very good, but
who cares?
I'm hoping my friend will stoke me up a little bit later.
We'll arrive with the gin. Yeah, Mari's in the background helping out. So David and I will try and be well behaved, sitting down in the corner, and we're going to listen to Brenda's story first. So. But before we all do all of that, I'm going to take everyone, just as I always do, to the magazine and just show you David and Brenda's pages in the magazine, just so you know how to contact them. So let's go through. So this first page that we've arrived on here is David's page. I was looking at this earlier to see what pages they were on, because by now I'm like, oh dear, I don't want to be scrolling up and down. I can't find anyone. So here's David's contact details, and let me go. There we go. So you've got David's email there. If you want to contact him, you've got his website address there, and he's on Facebook, and he's also on Instagram. And so you can see all his images, and if you're motivated to contact him and talk more, then there we go. And then Brenda's page. Brenda is on page 76. So David was page 66, and the same with Brenda here. As you can see, we've got Brenda's email address, website, and that's your actual shop where people can buy, isn't it, Brenda?
Yeah.
And then Facebook and Instagram. And you're getting more active on both of those platforms, aren't you?
I'm doing my best. I've been challenged by all of that, I have to say.
Yes, we're all challenged a bit by Instagram and Facebook, but it's and the thing is, they're constantly changing it. So I just had a conversation with Sophie, who does all of our Facebook work, and Molly does all the Instagram, and she was saying, she'd just spoken to a guru. You have to have gurus in these things now, and they've changed the whole way it works again. I was like, oh, thank goodness that Sophie does it, because that really blows my brain cells out.
Well, certainly MailChimp was messing me about last time I was trying to send something out.
Yeah, MailChimp's another one. So we're going to put Brenda's website up on the screen now, so you can see Brenda's website, because we're going to chat to Brenda first. So here we go. This is Brenda's website. So when you arrive on Brenda's website, you're in the right place. This is her. That's a bit about her work, and then you can see the various collections. And as you go across the bar,
gosh, there's some low-res stuff there.
You need to update your website. Free shipping, artist statement, and then Collaged, the Collaged DVD, which we will talk a little bit about during our chat. So David and I are going to go down in the corner, and we're going to hand the stage over to you, and then we'll see David back here in a little while.
Okay.
There we go.
So
Brenda Hartill, you have the stage. Where did it all start for Brenda? Tell us your story.
okay. Well, I've always wanted to do art. Ever since I was about 3, I was drawing and painting all the time. And it's just sort of, I couldn't let it go, really. So when I was a child, I was doing paintings of the Queen in her coronation robes. I remember that in particular. And the coronation was quite a big thing in those days. It's just gone on and on, really. When I was with my family, we were down in Devon, and for whatever reason, my parents decided to emigrate, and so we went to New Zealand. And I was 14 at that age. Went on a ship. It took 5.5 weeks. You couldn't fly in those days, and it was an amazing trip. Especially at the age of 14, it's quite a difficult time to be making a huge change like that. But of course, it was the art room that I headed for, and I've always wanted to do that. So I ended up going to art school over in New Zealand. And indeed, my parents actually didn't want me to go to an English art school. And I believe that was one of the reasons why they went to New Zealand. However, 4 years later, I got a scholarship to come back to England to go to an English art school. So my poor parents, I'm afraid, in the end, they didn't win with that one. So I came back to England, and in fact, I've lived here ever since. And I lived in London for many, many years. Sort of settled in London, really. And when I went to art school, was something about the work I was doing at the time which somehow didn't slot in with what everybody else was supposed to be doing. I was doing quite figurative work with the paintings, and so I decided that I was going to move over to doing theatrical design. You have to be able to draw if you're doing theatre, and I had done quite a lot of theatre. I'd enjoyed being in university theatre groups and so on back in New Zealand, and so I went in that direction, and for quite a long time that was what I was doing. I got married soon after I got going on all of that, and went to America for 4.5 years. My husband was doing a PhD over in Duke University in North Carolina, which was quite an interesting place to be. Martin Luther King was assassinated at that time, and we were very much involved in political things, which we weren't supposed to be, of course. We were supposed to not get involved in any of that. However, I decided that, well, at least I'd made an agreement with my husband that we would return to the UK. It was one of those things that when we decided to get married, that had to be part of the deal. And so I was never really settled in America, and certainly where we were living in North Carolina, and then also in Kentucky. So we saw the real America, I think, at that time. At least I suppose there's many Americas, isn't there? So we returned back to London, and I carried on with doing my theatre. And I managed to get a secondment to the Young Vic, which was a pretty good thing at the time. Of course, the Young Vic had only been going for a few years, so it was a very exciting time to be involved with it. However, shortly after that, I started having children, and I've discovered that being an itinerant designer and going here, there, and everywhere to design shows didn't really suit my status. I had little children, and it was very hard to look after them. And I did take my son when he was about about 9 months, I suppose, up to Birmingham Rep, where they have flats in the theatre for visiting designers and directors, and they said they'd provide childcare. Didn't happen, did it? And it was awful. It was really, really bad. So I gave it up. I had to stop doing the theatre. I couldn't stop doing the art. So I went to Morley College and I learnt how to do printmaking, how to do etching. I fell in love with that. Morley College had, I don't know whether it still has, a creche, which made it possible to learn something new, and I fell in love with it, and I've been a full-time artist ever since, and it was something that I could really get on with, really enjoyed. So the thing about etching is that you can make such a wide range of marks with from incredibly fine line to really, really chunky, heavy, overbitten, sort of almost three-dimensional, almost sculptural kind of work. And that was what I really liked about it. I fell in love with it, and I have always been an experimenter. So I tended to push the medium as much as I could, and I ended up doing a lot of very. I would work on small plates, which I would then use to collage, sort of, so that the prints were a collage. You could push one plate in one direction, and then if you wanted a fine line, say, you could use a copper. If you wanted to have it really deeply bitten, you could use zinc, and so on. So the picture that's right here, this was the sort of work that I was doing when I was once I'd sort of really got into it. It was a Londoner's London. It was the London where my children. Where I used to take them to the park and down to the seaside. And in fact, in this particular print here,
if you move the camera just round.
Yes, that's right. I do need to do that.
There we go. That's
okay. At this end that's me and my two children, and that's my friend and her two children, and we were going to Herne Bay for the day. So this is Waterloo Station, and then these houses here, they're all portraits of particular houses, but of course it's in a kind of different approach. It's not a naturalistic way of looking at it, but it's the whole idea is that London has trains going through it at every level, and until you get out to the countryside.
And the interesting thing about this is it's not just one plate, is it?
No, these are all separate plates. So it's a collage of plates, and it takes a long time to sort of, ink them up and lay them out properly so that they don't shift a bit. Technically it's a bit of a nightmare, but the results are, although you can't see them very well here, it really works well.
Yes, I mean, that's technically incredibly challenging to get that, and because as a printmaker, you don't just do it and do it once, you do it repeatedly. Yes, so to get the repeated number of addition all looking pretty much a similar kind of outcome, I know is incredibly difficult. Because how many plates would be in that?
Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
11 plates.
Mm.
And you would you collage them onto one big plate? And
no,
so you're
not in
putting them
this
on
case,
individual-
but I have done that. One of the things that I most like about etching is that you get this lovely plate mark around the edge, so you get the interest there.
Yes.
It just makes it that much crisper, that much more punchy, because you get these plate marks. And so that's what I've been, in this case, that's what I was trying to do. And so
you started off very, very figuratively, isn't it? It's very theatrical.
Yes.
You can see the theatre in the way
I
you've
suppose
constructed
so,
it.
yeah. I suppose so.
Yeah.
And at the time I was doing, these are little cards that I don't know whether you can see.
Yeah, if you just keep it still, then
Yeah. So I love all that very fine drawing of the houses and all of that. And then I started getting interested in embossing. So here, the bit at the bottom is just embossing. It doesn't have any ink in it, but it's the snow, and it's very effective. It works really well. So at that time. Sorry.
What area were you living at that time?
We were living in Catford, but Catford's not a particularly attractive place, but it's not that far from Greenwich, and so Greenwich and Blackheath we used to go to. So I was doing things like this, that were to do with having children, really. These were sold in the Royal Academy, in fact, and in Liberties. So they're little etchings, and that's my back garden. So there we go. Anyway,
so you submitted those to the Royal Academy for the summer show, or for
no,
the print show?
No. I used to get work in the summer show, but this was in the shop. They were just nice, it appealed to them, thank goodness, and they did sell very well. So that there's ones like this, which is all to do with It's called Rooftop London, and there are a series of 6 which are also printed as a set.
And you have a particular colour palette in these, don't you? There's quite a distinct colour palette that you're using.
I suppose so, yes. These have got a roll-up on them. They're just a very simple, fine line etching, but they've got a roll-up on top, so that it gives a sort of glow to it. And then this is another one that it's called Blackheath Wind, and again it's all to do with children on the heath and flying the kites, and then
were you still painting at this time?
No, I wasn't. No, I took up painting later on. I liked the idea of having of making affordable work, so that people could afford to buy people like me could actually afford to buy things. So then I started. My husband is a New Zealander, and so we were going backwards and forwards a bit to New Zealand at that time, and I started getting interested in doing very fine line pictures of the bush. So this is just a very small example of that, the kauri trees, the huge, wonderful, big trees, and all this lovely texture that the New Zealand bush has.
So you're drawing onto, as you say, onto plates with these and then printing them. So just so people are clear, it's drawing, and then you ink them up and then print them up.
Yes, etching is an intaglio process. So it means that you scratch into it. You don't actually physically scratch into it. You put a varnish over the top, and then you scratch into that, and then you put that in the acid. But it's an intaglio printing process, which means you rub the ink into the grooves. I've been told not to say too much about the technique. So
No, we'll come back to
I
the
won't
process.
go too far into that.
No, we're not. Today is more about your journey than about the process. But I think it's important when people are looking at the images that they understand what they're looking at.
That's right. Yes. So this is a picture of Blackheath, the lovely church on the heath.
There's so many buildings you were doing at that time. So many buildings and people, weren't there?
It was what interested me, really. It was that I liked the gritty London. I liked London, which was not the tourist London. It was the London where people who live here, what they see. People who have children.
At that time, were you working in your studio or were you working from home?
I think I'd moved into my studio in Southwark before I started doing this, because I had a most wonderful view of the trains. I had a view over the what do you call them, the bridges and things that had the trains going through. So this would have been just about the time I moved. But before that, I was doing things in a bedroom at home. But of course, I went to New Zealand at one point, and suddenly I met a group of artists friends who I'd gone to art school with, and 2 or 3 of them had got their own studios, and I remember thinking, well, why the hell am I working at home? I want a studio too, I said. And when I got back,
Poor
we went
Harold.
out.
Poor Harold.
I went and found a studio. He was always very helpful, and he really was keen for me to do what I wanted to do.
Well, he was very arty, really, wasn't he? His life was music, so he was very in the arts as well, wasn't he?
Yes,
Harold,
yes.
So.
Yes, well, he had this wonderful record shop in London. It's mostly classical that he's interested, but he's very wide-ranging taste, and that's what he was doing in London in the end. PhD or no PhD, that was what he wanted to do. So
you got your studio in Southwark, and were you? You said you met up with a group of artists. So were you alone in that studio, or were there other people in the studio?
No. I mean, this was when I was in New Zealand that I realised that people were getting studios, and I wasn't. And I thought, well, I've got to do this. I've got to go out to work. And by that time, my children were a few years older. I mean, we managed somehow.
So your studio in Southwark, did you share it with anyone?
No, I always had it to myself. There were other studios on different floors, but I did have a floor of a warehouse.
Wow! And
it was fantastic. It was such a, if anyone who's in a similar situation, I was in my sort of mid-30s, I suppose, at the time, and people, when they get to that stage, if they can only get a proper place of work, and as a printmaker, you really do need your facilities. I mean, you can go and work in a commercial studio. There are some good ones around, but I really didn't want to do that. I was keen to have my own setup.
As a printmaker, you've got that massive printing press, haven't you? So you need somewhere to house that as well.
And I always wanted it bigger than anyone else's. So I'll just show you this. It's a bit different because there's only a very narrow thing here. Yeah. I started to move on. This is still being quite figurative, but you can see I'm moving in the direction of being more abstract here. Yes. And at the bottom 2 plates are just embossing. So it was to do with making the embossing work as well as I possibly could. And
you were starting to experiment on this embossing. What inspired you down that road? Because you were intensely figurative here in this first one.
Yes.
So what inspired you down that road to this more abstract embossing? Do you remember?
Well, I just was interested to get it even more embossed, and this was when I started to make the plates very, very three-dimensional. And then I started getting into doing collagraph, because you could go even further with the embossing. I just liked the fact that this crisp, beautiful paper, I started about this time, I started using this Duchenne paper, which this, I'll show you this because it's sitting right here. But so this became quite embossed, but the paper is just, it's just dreamy. It's lovely. It's 400, I think this is a 400 gram, but it goes up to 600 gram. And it's handmade paper, and it just takes the three-dimensionality so well. And I started to use this. I ended up using it all the time.
Where did you find that then? Did you just happen upon it, or
no? I can't remember the name of the artist. I happened to see a demonstration. David Dodsworth, that's what it was. A demonstration of David Dodsworth printing, and I chatted to his printer who was doing. He wasn't there, and I said, wow, that's just what I need. I got really excited, and she told me what it was. And my paper man, John Purcell, who's always managed to get me the paper I want, he sent me some, and I haven't looked back. I mean, I've used it. It takes watercolor really well as well, because that's what I'm working on now. I'm doing things that are much more rich and full of color and more gold and so on. I'll show you those in a minute.
Yeah, so we're not in your actual studio right now, are we? We're in the house studio as opposed to a big studio.
Well, this
in the garden.
yes, here. That's where I do my. That's where I'm working at the moment. I'm pointing to the screen. I suppose you can figure that out.
We can see.
So when I'm doing things that are not messy, it's quite nice to do them at home. And over lockdown, I've been doing mostly working in here because it just keeps me happy. And I've got this lovely view as well out of. I can't really show you that because it's in the other direction. But lockdown was very hard at first. Not seeing my family was pretty difficult because they were all up in London, and I did get quite down in the first few weeks, I suppose, of lockdown. But I realised that the only thing that's going to keep me going really is to get to do my creative artwork, and that's what I've been doing. And of course it did make a huge difference.
And also your artwork morphed again, didn't it? It moved again during lockdown. Yes. So you're doing something quite different again, aren't you?
Yes. I'm actually using my collagraphs. So I haven't really talked much about collagraphs.
So you need to tell us
how much time have I got?
You're fine. You tell us what a collagraph is. You don't worry about it. You leave me to worry about that.
Okay, all right. Well, I've got a few collagraphs. No, those are etchings.
I think you need to explain what a collagraph is first.
Okay. Can I show you one or two etchings before I get on to collagraphs?
Yes, go on then.
It's a linear thing, really.
Yes.
This is a fairly small work, which is, it's actually a collaged etching. And so there are two plates here, and then they are mounted onto another plate around. This is all mounted, so they're not done separately, they're mounted. And this is covered with carborundum, and I started to use carborundum at that time because I got a better result really than using what we would normally think of using as aquatint, very strong aquatint. So I'm mixing media here. This is getting towards the collagraph. This one, I'm using some plant material, which this is the stage before the collagraph. So I'm actually pressing. This is actually a what do they call it? I can't remember now. I've got some notes here and I can't find my way around them.
It looks quite
anyway.
it looks like a leaf,
Yes,
structure.
yes, it is. It's a leafy structure, and that was pressed onto the wax that you use when you are using soft ground etching. I'm getting technical again.
Yes.
Anyway, so
don't get too technical.
No, all right, all right.
So this is showing that you're so experimental.
Yeah,
you'll
I do.
Just keep pushing yourself and doing all sorts of madness.
Exactly. Yeah. So here, this is a chronograph, and it's basically using carborundum, which is this grit that holds the ink and makes this very, very rich background, and then I'm drawing over the top with glue and with hammerite, metal paint. So basically, I'm dribbling it on in this case.
You're using something else that's dangerous.
Yeah. I suppose you could say that.
You do like to be dangerous, don't you, Brenda?
Well, the danger, yes, I do have the dangerous plate to show you. There was a moment there where I kind of got a bit too carried away. I'm just going to move those over and see if I can find it as we've moved into that direction. So
yes. Brenda's experimental nature got a little carried away once.
So yes, this is actually an etching, but it's an etching which got eaten away by neat nitric acid. I foolishly poured in some neat nitric acid onto a plate, which was going quite well as a landscape, and it was a mislabeled bottle. And I did have a fume cupboard, so I slammed down the front of the fume cupboard and looked at what was quite a promising plate just disappearing in front of my eyes. So I did manage to rescue it, and it's not. I might say it's not something to be recommended. This system, but those pieces were salvaged, and there was a lot of very interesting shapes that were coming out of it, and so I broke it up and did things with it, and then mounted it onto another plate, and then surrounded it with carborundum. So, as you do, and then I'll just show you the other. Quite often in those days, I was doing different colour. I was trying different colour with the same plate. So this one is the blue version.
Yes.
And although I can't get much shine. Oh yes, there we are. That's the silver leaf.
Yeah. So you put silver leaf and you do rubbing on the top of it as well, don't you?
Yes.
You rub on top of it as well.
Yeah.
To bring up the highlights.
That's right.
Yes, you do love a bit of danger, but
indeed,
it's these experiments, because you've had such an experimental nature, that have led you down the road to find yourself to where the next stage.
I suppose that's true. I've got another one here that I don't have very many of because.
Oh wow!
This is actually a piece of coral, and I only got about 10 prints out of it, and I'm afraid it completely crushed when it was going through the press.
So I think that's another thing that people would be interested in. When an artist decides on an edition number, they will look at a plate and they will decide how many they think they will get out of that plate. So you make a guesstimate, don't you? You kind of guess.
Yes, I don't know quite what I said in this one.
What did you say? How many did you think?
No, this is an artist's proof.
Ah, so you won't know.
The thing is that it's a nominal number, and quite often you don't print them all up.
No.
So you print, say, I don't know, I used to print about 10 or 15 and then see how they sold. And then, but I still had to kind of stick with what I decided So
Exactly.
it doesn't
So you
always
say,
mean.
yeah, so you say 1 of 100 or 10 of 100, but there may only be 20.
Yes.
They don't necessarily,
Yes.
just because it says 100, that's an intention.
Yes.
It's not
yes.
it's an arbitrary number that was picked
But
at the beginning.
there are some forms of printing, like lithography, for instance,
Yes.
or lino cut, especially the reduction method of lino cut, where you have to decide on the edition, because you've got to print all of one colour, and then you print again all of the second colour and all of the third colour. So that you have to print everything up
Yes.
in one hit, as it
Yes.
were.
So there are some print methods that it is a reliable number, but in your case, because you're so experimental, it is, you don't know whether the plate's going to survive, or the amount of times it's put through the press as well. I mean, I've seen that where it has gone through and you're like, no, that's just not good enough quality anymore.
Yes, exactly. Or the plate just crushes.
Especially if it's got coral on it.
Indeed. It was very sad, because the original piece of coral was rather beautiful, and I did have a bit of a problem, thinking I shouldn't really be doing this, but it's so great, and I'd love to be able to make it into a print.
And you have had, along the way, studio support, haven't you?
Oh yes, I've from very early on, I had a printer. I used to have a printer, and sometimes two. When I was really going at it all hours, I had two printers who came and worked for me, and I've always had really good people who I think have learnt from me, and they've been wonderful people to work with. So at the moment I've got Nicola, who's been with me for about 14 years, and so she knows my methods like the back of her hand, and I wouldn't be able to do it without her,
No,
so it's like a collaboration, really.
Yeah, you had Dawn Cole, didn't you, before that?
She was
an
great.
Incredibly good printer in her own right as well.
Yes, exactly. Well, they usually are artists in their own right, but it depends what kind of stage they're at in their career. That's the thing. And also, it always meant that if somebody came and printed for me, they could also use my facilities. So that was
we were hearing from Vincent the other day how generous you were with letting him use your print studio as well. I think that's the thing I'm so impressed with you, that your generosity in sharing your space and sharing also your knowledge, because you are an incredible fan, and because you're so experimental, I think you'll just try anything and push it right to the boundaries of what is possible. And tell us a bit about selling. Tell us a bit about when you first got into a gallery and how that happened, and your experience of selling your work.
Well, when I lived in London, it was much easier, and I was in the middle of things, and we didn't have COVID. No. And I was a lot younger and I had a lot more energy. So at one point I had about 30 galleries that I was selling to worldwide, but it's not like that anymore. And indeed, I've had a period where I haven't been able to do a lot for health reasons, but I'm sort of getting back onto the horse now, with help. I'm not shy at asking for help on this. Can I show you what I'm actually doing at the moment?
That would be amazing, to show us what you're doing at the moment. We'd love to see what you're working on now.
Well, I'm using my collagraphs as a starting, or all my etchings as a starting point for painting. So the textures that's not actually, the light's not very good on that. Let's see if I can get the light a bit better. You can't really see the three-dimensional aspect of it. We were fiddling around trying to get that better. But anyway, I'll forge on. I'll see whether I can find one or two that are showing it a bit better.
I think if you turn them slightly to there you are. If you turn them slightly to an angle, there you are. You get the much more textured detail.
Yeah. So they are quite three-dimensional. So I'm adding silver and gold, and watercolor and ink. It's real mixed media, and I'm having a good old play, really, enjoying making.
So what you're doing is you're putting the plate through the press, but without any ink in it.
Yes, or sometimes I just have a very, very weak ink, so there's a bit of the embossing which is showing the shapes a little bit.
Yeah,
but
so
then
it's like a ground in the background.
Yes. So it allows me then to pick up the textures where I want to, kill them where I want to. I mean, for instance, this dark area here, I think it did have quite a lot of texture on it, but because I painted it dark, it changed the whole shape of things, and that's what's so much fun in doing this, that I'm able to manipulate and kill the texture if I want to, or enhance it if I want to.
That's incredible.
And there's an awful lot of playing around that goes on.
Yeah, so you've got some on the board behind you. I've been watching them. I need to see them now. Look at that one. The colour saturation is incredible.
Yeah, yes.
So the inspiration for these shapes.
It's landscape, really. I'm always interested in erosion and the shape of the landscape and the universal shapes that plants and rock and buildings and field shapes and so on make. But I'm absolutely not interested in perspective. So you always find that my things have a feeling as if you're looking at them from above.
I was going to say, you're kind of helicoptering, aren't you?
Indeed, yes. Yeah. Well, I have a friend in New Zealand whose family have helicopters, and I've had a most wonderful time over the years going up and seeing things from a helicopter's point of view. It's absolutely wonderful.
When you do that, do you photograph, or do you just register it in your head, or do you carry a sketchbook?
I don't. What happens is I usually work flat out after I get back. It just kind of inspires me and gets into my head, and I will do some. I remember there was a session that I had when I was up in the Southern Alps down in New Zealand, and I got back and I sort of shut myself away for a couple of days doing these very big, bold drawings that were reminiscent of what I'd seen when I was out there. But I don't like working from photographs, and I'm processing it up here. So it doesn't. As soon as I try and capture a particular shape, then it destroys. It doesn't work. Doesn't work.
Yeah.
The way that's the way I work. But I have done over the years. I've done very, very delicate, very precise drawings that I've worked from. But for me, that doesn't work anymore.
I think we've just touched the tip of the iceberg. I mean, I'm very aware that we haven't talked about time in Spain. We haven't. There's so much to talk about. I think what would be really nice to do now. That's amazing. That looks like a kind of a klimt, doesn't it? The way you've got this detail in the middle.
Interesting that you should say that. You're not the first person. and I started to look at Klimt. I thought, well, I mean, I have looked at him in the past, but it's not. It isn't anything obvious. It's not in any way.
Wasn't intentional.
Not a direct. Yeah, it's not anything direct.
That wasn't intentional. It's just, as you say, because all your inspiration is like just from living, and then you come back to your studio and it's everything that you've kind of stored, all that inspiration in your head, and it just ends up out. It's not surprising that occasionally that you will see things that we think, oh, that's reminiscent of, that would make
people are always
perfect
trying to analyse things, aren't they?
Yeah. Well, that's
anyway,
how our
is my
brain
time
works.
up, darling?
Darling, we're going to ask you some questions.
Oh, okay.
Because, as I say, we've scratched the very tip of the iceberg of Brenda Hartill, but that just means that there's lots and lots of these to do in the future, which Brenda will be actually mortified to hear. But it's okay. So the first question is from Charlie, and she says, the piece that is over your shoulder, so the trainscape, how long did that take you to do?
Oh, no. Not that one.
Yes, that question.
Yeah, well, probably about a month and a half, I think, that one. It was very heavy on the drawing.
Yes.
And everything that's in that picture has been drawn from life. And so, although it's compiled, it's not, a point of view that, every building comes from somewhere else, or like it's been compiled in my way.
It's a compilation of all your memories.
Yes, and
that's what makes it so special.
Yeah, and I used a photocopier to kind of, in those days, this was before one could do these magic things on the computer. I think it was 1982 or 3 or something. I did that, and all of it was done on a photocopier to reduce the drawings down and then get them onto the plate, and then it was quite a performance, really. Quite a lot.
You can see why Brenda decided to experiment with more abstract landscapes.
I love doing it. I absolutely love doing it. That's the thing. Once you get into it,
yes,
you just keep going until it.
But your eyes were very grateful when you stopped doing quite detailed drawings.
Indeed, yeah.
Vincent says you're very experimental and love the story you told of using the heat from the sun in Spain for etching plates. We'll talk about those things another time, I think, because there's a whole story about Spain which I would love to go into. Okay. Jonathan, your works are like organic tapestries of texture and colour. What inspires or dictates how they turn out? Well,
I don't start off with an idea of I start off with an idea, but I don't know what it's going to look like until I've done it, because the process is an important part of the inspiration. So I follow my nose with it, and it's not the way a lot of people work. I don't plan it out to start with. I follow my nose. When I was doing these strips of, not this, because obviously this is very specific, but when I was doing these sort of landscapes with different plates, I didn't know how that was going to turn out until I did the plates, and I would swap them around, and I tried printing them one way and tried printing them another, and in the end I got a result. And so for several years that's how I worked, sort of trying to get the best out of the textures that came with the etching, or when I was doing collagraph with the materials that I was using. Does that answer the question?
I think it does. I think you're very intuitive and very instinctive in your work, aren't you? And that's And like you say, you don't take photos and you don't draw, do a sketchbook. It's very much in your own mind.
I used to do a lot of drawing, but I don't now. I use the techniques that I'm going to end up with.
Yeah, so I think you kind of answered Emma's question here, but we'll just cover it off. Apart from your initial drawings, how much prep work do you do before you start working on the plate? So I think you were just kind of discussing that, weren't you?
I do it. The prep work is doing it.
Yes.
I'm in tune with the materials I'm using.
Yes.
That's, I think, the best way of describing it.
And also, do you seal your collagraph plates?
Absolutely, yeah. The collograph plates, the best way of having a successful collograph is to make sure it's absolutely sealed properly, with no little holes left. You have to fill everything, fill all those little holes that, you know, come from doing, putting various materials on. You've got, that's really, really important.
And Nick says, do you use paper above 400 grams?
Well, 600 gram.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you do.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing about collograph, particularly sculptural collograph, which is what I'm doing, there are other kinds of collograph which are nothing like as textured as what I do. But the thicker the paper, most likely you have of not tearing the paper, not tearing your blankets, or ruining the press. So the thick paper is lovely for the yummy feeling that it gives you, but it is actually a practical thing as well. And you can, I've tried, if I haven't got any paper that I want to, if I just don't have any and I'm trying to do some proofing or something, I put 2 sheets of paper in, or a piece of blotting paper, just to sort of help to hold that very heavy pressure that you need to have to do the sort of work I do.
And she's saying, is it with shellac that you seal it with?
It depends what I'm making. No, I don't ever use shellac, actually. I use water-based varnish. And if I want a matte finish, I use matte varnish. If I want a satin finish, or I can sometimes use the varnish to reflect the colour that I wanted to print. So if you can use a gloss varnish, then it's much paler. It actually can be part of the collograph. The sealing can be part of the collograph, but you probably would varnish it first with a matte, and then maybe get some other more glossy.
I think we need to bring Emma over and let her do a little bit of sitting and watching you. I think that might be a good idea for Emma.
Well, we've got a new lot. I've got a new series that I'm dying to get into, actually.
Yes, you are. That's true. Thank you so much. That's been wonderful. I mean, I know, as I say, we've just scratched the very tip of the iceberg, but that means that there's just loads more to talk about, which is really exciting. And we can have lots of future sessions where we chat about other things. And I can terrify you half to death even more. Brenda loves me. Really.
Okay.
You love me, really, don't you?
I absolutely do. I think you do a very good job of making us all feel
really uncomfortable. Making you feel really uncomfortable. That's been brilliant. Thank you. You can go off and have a gin and tonic now, while I bring David back up onto the screen, and hopefully David hasn't gone off and had a gin and tonic, and he's been waiting politely in the corner.
No.
Thanks for being so patient, David.
Well, Brenda, I do have to say, I've done a fair amount of printmaking, and I cannot believe the registration in the piece next to you and how meticulous that it has to be, because I was never very good at registration. I was doing a lot of monoprint.
I don't register prints. I don't use registration. They're all they're once through the press. Yeah. All of them.
Amazing.
So,
as she said, she's incredibly instinctive, experimental, and risky.
Yeah.
She's just very risky. Thank you so much.
Okay.
I'm going to pop you down in the corner so you can listen, but you can also go off and have a nice...
I think it's time for the G&T.
A nice G&T while I chat to David.
Bye then.
We'll see you in a bit. There we are. We've turned her off. So that was fascinating, wasn't it?
Amazing, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've known Brenda now for about 14 or 15 years, and I'm not a printmaker. I came across Brenda through an introduction from a friend, and it's just inspiring to watch her work, and she really kind of got me into exploring other art techniques and seeing how other artists work. So she's really why we're, one of the reasons why we're sitting here today, because she kind of pushed me more into the curation and artist interviewing. And I did a book with her. I have it behind me. Quite a few years ago, and it's called What's the Story? And that kind of is what inspired these lockdown interviews, and this ART360 event was, I love storytelling, and I think that it's so interesting to hear the artist's story, because that shows you when you buy a piece of work, you're not just buying that moment in time, you're buying that moment in time plus the history of all of that has gone on before. And I'm loving meeting new artists, and obviously I've only met you very briefly, David, a couple of times before today, and so and we had a really good conversation about politics just before we came on, and I'm fascinated about American politics.
Yes, well,
I did.
That would be a whole.
That's a whole other crowdcast. I did American politics as an A-level just because it fitted into the curriculum at the time. But it's lovely to be able to talk to artists from other countries and hear that we're all kind of like, we all have our story, but there's a lot of similarity, isn't there? There's a lot of familiar paths that we all take. So you said to me you hail from New York originally.
Yeah.
Tell us how, what happened. Where's your earliest memories, and how do you end up being an artist today? I'm going to do that thing where I dip down in the corner.
Okay, yeah, it's sort of a hard thing to compress all this amount of time.
Yeah.
But I'll start. Originally, when I was very young, like junior high here in the States, and then into high school, I was always shooting photographs, and I was making actual movies, Super 8 movies. So there's sort of these two tracks, or number of tracks, that continue throughout my life. And deciding to go to college, I was interested in photography. So it was either I had applied to NYU for film and Rochester Institute of Technology for photo science and engineering. Now, my parents wanted me to go to Rochester Institute of Technology for photo science because they thought that was a better career path. So I did, which I still question whether I should have done that or not. But when I was in Rochester, I started with photo science, and I quickly realized that although I was good in physics and calculus and these kinds of things, it was not my interest, and I switched into photo as a fine art. And in that process, I went into photo as a fine art, and this is back, I guess, in the 70s, and there was a burgeoning community of photo as a fine artists, but they had sort of a very fixed idea of what photo and fine art was. And that really wasn't where I was going, and I started to play around with things, all kinds of things, all kinds of imagery using very high contrast and things that weren't received very well at the school. And then one thing I can relate to Brenda is not only through experimentation, but through mistakes. I sort of came upon the image behind me on my side here is imagery. I started to play with imagery like that. We literally had plastic blow up furniture in one of the apartments I lived in, and I started to shoot through the plastic and come up with these sort of amorphous kind of shapes and things. So it was by accident that I kind of got into this visual format, if you will. And it created spaces for me, which really just a light bulb went off. And so I said, okay, let me start to play with this. Now, back in those days, real film had limitations in terms of how big you could blow it up. And part of my concern was, and I'm still concerned with this, is I want there to be a physical presence of the work that I do so that you can't sort of escape it and intellectually say it's back here and I do the mental process. What I really want is I want there to be a physicality to it as well as a piece that ideally you can intellectualize. So I've always strived for big work. Now in the last couple of years, I started back, and I'll fill in between, but I started back into this because now digital cameras have better resolutions and I can print much larger. So, and unfortunately, I'll pan around this room in a minute, but there's not much to see. please go to my website and look at the work there, because I think it unfortunately it's smaller, but it speaks for the kind of work that I'm doing.
We'll have a look at your website in a little while, and you
in a bit. So just you'll have a better idea of what the kind of work is there. So, but so the concerns conceptually way back when were to essentially create spaces that, from my point of view, that you could live in or dwell in. So and part of that physicality, it was part of it. So back then I was doing small 8x10 and 11x14 prints, and that just wasn't fulfilling my need to do that other larger part. So I ended up sort of not doing photo as a fine art, and I was into drawing classes and painting. And then I started to airbrush these large images on canvases that were sometimes 11 or 7 by 7 feet in order to get that effect. That carried through until after college, and I was still doing that when I moved back into New York City and had a loft and was trying to get established. But then all kinds of tangents took off. I was doing neon work with Rudy Stern, who was a sort of a precursor of this new neon movement. And I had my own neon company. Then I went into video production. I had a video production company for 20 years. And I was still obviously always doing visual things, but I kind of put my fine art work to the side and to do more commercial video production and special effects and those kinds of things, which I'm actually still doing now at Roche. I work for Roche in Genentech in the United States and do training and do all kinds of building of those kinds of modules, et cetera. So that's still a thread that goes with me. But this piece and the pieces that you see on my website, it's like I believe that once I sort of came upon this mistake, if you will, or this accident, it just resonated with me, and it's been a conceptual thing that's carried through. I've done printmaking, I've done painting throughout the years, I've done many other kinds of disciplines, but it's always this thread that I relate to. And now in the last, I'd say 2 to 3, 4 years, I'm back in much more heavily and trying to get my work out there, because I can print larger, and I'm still experimenting with that as well. But it's kind of this, I have always believed that when you find that thread that's in you, then you really can't escape it. You can sort of go tangentially and bounce around and do other things. But once you know that that's a part of who you are, then it just becomes a way, how do you keep trying to manifest it and make it better and get closer to what that is? Now, also like Brenda, when I shoot now, I don't know what I'm going to get. I have no preconceived ideas. Every time I try to say, oh, I'm going to start to do something, or I have a good idea of how to put some paper sculpture things together and whatever, it doesn't work. So you kind of have to really depend a lot on randomness and kind of, just, I don't know what. So, and the hard part that I have now is some people are accepting my work and putting in magazines and things, which is great, but they're always looking for thematic, pieces. Why, give me 10 pieces that all fit into one thing. And I can kind of do that if you look at my website, but a lot of times I struggle with that because sometimes I'll get 2 or 3 out of a session, maybe if I'm lucky, or sometimes if you shoot for hours, you get nothing. More times than not, you get nothing. So it's that's kind of a strange thing. But I think I've always been this thing where I believe everyone that does artwork has this one concept or this one thing that is them, and that sort of resonates through the work. And which is different than some artists, which I feel like have good ideas, and they manifest those which aren't necessarily representative of who they are personally. It's like, here's a good idea, I'm going to put this together with this, and it fulfills a certain thing. And I don't know if you follow it. I mean, photography or art sometimes, I'm sure you do. They say, oh, the theme of this is, the pandemic. Go out and shoot things that are representative of the pandemic, which to me, doesn't mean anything. I could never do that. I mean, I could do it. It's just it wouldn't resonate. It would be, maybe I could be successful at it by lucky, but it's not something that resonates with me. And so, not that it's not important, and some people could devote their whole life to that. That's just not my particular concept or conceptual piece.
I think when you came on earlier, when we were in the green room, I was having a conversation with Sophie, wasn't I, on the phone? Sophie, who does our Facebook things, and that was the very conversation we were having. It's that you have to be true to your passion. You have to be in alignment with yourself, however that is, because as a fine artist, because if you're not, people will know that. and the work won't go where it's meant to go. There is a place for it, and if you're true to your passion, people will see that and they will respond to that, and it'll achieve what it's meant to achieve in this. And the minute you start to try and fit yourself, the square peg into a round hole, it all becomes clunky and uncomfortable, and you don't get where you're meant to be. And that's the thing, isn't it? It's, if you're just doing this to make money, there are many other easier ways to make money. If you're doing this because it is a passion within your soul, then you're driven. And I think it's absolutely fascinating to me, the random nature, even of us doing these broadcasts, that there's two people here who have completely randomly been thrown together on this particular day, at this particular time, who are both doing this highly experimental, completely intuitive, don't prepare, just see where it takes you kind of work. And I find that incredible, the random. How did that happen?
I don't know. But the interesting thing that I will say, though, because you asked me about who were influences for me. And so when I was sort of in this transition period when I was in college, of not really fitting in with the fine art photography crowd and not really into the art world crowd, I had a drawing teacher at the time, because I was taking drawing and painting as well. And his name was Bob Cole, and he was a painter in his own right. And I was doing all this work, and it was similar to the work that I'm doing now. And he was like, and I was sort of questioning the whole thing, and I wasn't really sure where I am. And he said, look, you can always get 6 people to love it and 6 people to hate it. So just do your work right down the middle. Just don't worry about that. He goes, your audience is not your concern. It's your artwork that's your concern. And I still remember that. So whenever I sort of feel in doubt and go, I don't know where this work fits in, and it still doesn't fit in, because if I enter into photo things, they go, well, it's not really photographic. And there's still some of that. Some people don't have that. And then the art world crowd goes, well, they're large prints, but we don't really do prints. We don't really do photography. So it's still in no man's land. I'm still trying to find my audience, but that's not my concern. My concern is my work. And
exactly.
So
make the work for you. Don't make it for the audience.
Right.
You should always be making it for you. And I think that's what creates the artist angst, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, like you said, I think also I completely agree. You don't have a choice. You keep doing work no matter what. Even when you stop doing work, you then end up going back to doing work. It's not like it's a raison d'etre. You just go. That's who you are.
It is the meaning of your being. Is why you are here. And that's the most fascinating thing to me. Is this journey that all of us go on in life, but it's particularly artists such as yourself and Brenda that are working so intuitively and instinctively and just trying to find that pathway for themselves. It is an incredible thing to observe. It would be interesting to look at your website. Do you mind if I put your website up, and then you can show us and talk us through some of the work that you're talking about, because I think your website is incredible, and it really does. Look at that. I mean, look at those. Let's bring that up on screen, and you can come back down in this corner with me while we hand over the screen to you.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing.
Wow.
The interesting thing about these pieces all together, sometimes I think it's almost too much visual information. So I always tell people, if they go on my website, click on them individually. You don't have to do this now, and it will just take you to the one piece, so that you're not inundated with so much other information at the same time.
Yeah. So this piece, it looks like fragmented glass, doesn't it? It gives you that, and as you say, an otherness.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I work with, not funny, but interesting. I work with another artist who hails from America, Edith, who is actually watching, and her work has an otherness. I wonder why that is. Is there something in your culture, do you think, that takes you to this otherness?
The strangest thing someone said to me, I was talking to somebody in Helsinki about my portfolio, and he said to me, which I really thought was funny because I don't feel this way. He goes, "Oh, your work is so West Coast United States, like California." And I'm like, and I'm from New York, so I just thought that was like a strange kind of a comment. I took it at face value, but I just thought that was kind of funny. I think, like I said, I'm really concerned with trying to go. If you go back, I'll bring up another piece I want to I can't control it from here.
No, I'm in charge. So hang on a second. What piece do you want to?
Just go to portfolio, back to portfolio.
Okay.
And go to, on the left, go to Dommage, which is the second one down in galleries. Yeah, and the one at the top in the middle, just up above, yeah, that one, Rebound. Yeah, I mean, this to me is more, weirdly, this second gallery is my newer work. I don't know why I didn't switch it with the first gallery, but yeah, I try to create this atmospheric kind of ambivalent kind of space that, again, that people can inhabit if I'm successful. And that's kind of, and I try to have some visual ambiguity so that you're not completely defined as to what this is. Sometimes the lines will resonate and they'll pop forward and then they'll pop back, which is also important to me. I don't necessarily want you to have this as a fixed thing in your mind, like, oh, I got this. I mean, not only this image, but that's kind of what the thread is throughout. So the more ambiguity and the more that I don't know what I'm seeing and I'm feeling, and each time I come up to a piece, it may make me feel something different. That's kind of what I strive to do for me personally, as well as I hope for the audience. And
you're saying about the printing. So what size? Oh, that's 48.
This one's huge. Yeah,
I mean, huge.
and I'm experimenting with that now because someone actually, the person in Helsinki, said, "Why don't you try Diasec?" Which I haven't tried yet, because that might work. And I've printed on metal, I've printed on paper, and so it's kind of like I'm trying to figure out what the best way forward is, and again, the sizing thing, what the best is going to give me the most clarity as well as the most saturation. So that's my new plan now, is to start to print a few on Diasec and just bring them home and see what I like and see what I don't like about that,
So when you're saying you bring them home, you don't print these personally, or do you go somewhere
No,
else?
No, I don't print. No. These I go out to not into printing, and I don't have the machinery for this. And then with something like Diasec, that's a whole process. I could never do that. That has to go out. Yeah. I love that I don't print. I mean, years ago we used to print everything by hand. No. Those days are over. I'm really glad about that.
Did you have you had your own darkroom, did you?
I had my own darkroom, and then throughout my career, different careers, I've had studios, I've had painting studios, I've had printmaking. My master's degree is in, it's sort of in supervision or administration of the arts, but as part of it, you do a studio portion, and I was doing a lot of printmaking back then. And then I had access to, I was director of continuing education at Parsons School of Design, so for 5 or 6 years there, I had access to all the facilities there. So throughout my life, I've had all these different assets that I could sort of use. So I've worked at Columbia University for a long time and had assets to use there. So yeah, but it's sort of like now I've sort of come full circle because I think the technology has changed where I can now use something that I'm very familiar with, which is the photo process, but print larger and not have to print them myself. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree. At first, when we went from analog to digital, I was really disconcerted by it as a photographer myself. And but now that we're well into the digital era, it is amazing what you can do with this technology now. And it's lovely to hand it over to somebody else to do the actual the big printing of it.
Well, and then the other interesting thing is, like I said, I do a lot of special effects for video, and I still do that. And I'm completely adept with all the programs, whether it's Photoshop to After Effects to you name it, Premiere, Final Cut, all that stuff. But these photographs, with almost no exception, aren't altered at all. So there's what you see is those were the images, the way they were shot. Occasionally, I might bring up the contrast, like a little, occasionally, but almost never, because it's sort of, I want it to be that this is this organic process that I'm shooting this and this is what you're getting.
Yeah.
It's important to me because I know that I could manipulate all the stuff and sort of almost build it on its own, but that's really not what my work is about. So I sort of like to tell people, because some people go, "Oh, you did this all in Photoshop." And I'm like, no, I didn't do any of it in Photoshop. I shot this. That's why some of the images are shot in that long landscape, because that's the way that I shoot them. And to me, the most successful ones are the ones that I don't even crop. It's just there. That is that weird, like panoramic kind of format.
Yeah.
That's 16 by 9 format. So it's like it is that weird rectangle. But that's comes right out of the camera and just is.
So what camera are you using then to get that?
Now
Because you're doing all this in the camera.
Yeah, no. So now I'm using a Sony. I always have to remember it's the A7R4. Okay, so this is the one with each. I've had the 3, and this is the 4.
Yeah.
So it has the more resolution in terms of megapixels. Again, so to print larger. I also, from back in my college days, use extension tubes with a zoom. So essentially, I'm getting in that way. I'm not using a macro lens. I'm using an extension tube on a zoom lens, and that allows me to get in really close and to get some of these, the depth of field thing that I play with, that some things are crisp and some things aren't crisp. That's all because of the extension tubes in the camera. But I've been doing that since college, which is quite a while ago.
Well, you sound like you've been within the education field as well a lot of your career. So that's where your love of theory.
Well, yeah, I've taught painting, I've taught drawing, I taught animation for a long time for young kids. I taught high school art. Foundation art, and so yes. And I actually, sometimes if you look online, there's I did a pilot show for a thing called Imagine That, which was a kids animation kind of storytelling show that I was trying to pitch. It wasn't successful, but it's still up there on the web. You can take a look at that. Yes. So the education and the creative process. Part of my master's degree was about how at 12 or 13 years old or 11 or whatever it is, people get turned off to art. It's like they go, they see somebody render a really nice piece, and then they go, I can't do that, so therefore I can't be an artist, and therefore I'm turned off to art for the rest of my life. And I was very concerned about that, and I still am. And so part of the thread for me is to try to make sure that at that age, and part of this television show is about that, sort of free associative thinking and sort of animation to help people say, yeah, it's all acceptable. You don't have to be able to render really well in order to do work. And even when I was drawing, because I'm certainly not a classical drawing type person, I did take pride in the fact that my work did look different. I couldn't do the thing that 7 people in the class could do. So at first I was, apprehensive, and you get sort of self-conscious about it, but then you're like, oh, this is what makes my work. You know what I'm saying? So you have to, once you get past that threshold, and I think that education piece at that age for a lot of kids it's not healthy, because we look at somebody else and they say, oh, I can't do that. So therefore they literally turn it off for many years and may not come back to it. So
yeah, you do see a lot of people coming back to art, don't you, in their like later years, going, this is the thing I loved at school, but so and so said I couldn't do it, or my cousin's auntie said Fred was better at it than me. And gosh, we are, we're complex beings. I think we've very much discovered this along this journey, and it's only a slight nuance or twist in the tale can either end up in a outcome of an artist or an outcome of a scientist or whatever along that way. I'm fascinated. How do you present your work? Do you frame it?
Well, I have a couple here in the house. Some of them are edge to edge. It's just this one isn't mounted. Obviously, the one that's there. Let's see if this one. This is an older piece. I don't know if you'll able to see the resolution on this one, but that's an older monochrome, and it's just edge to edge.
Wow.
And then there's another one downstairs that's let me go down there if you don't mind walking around.
No, we love the walking around. We're in San Francisco, David. We're loving it. We're loving life.
So currently they're edge to edge.
We can't travel, so we're just traveling with you.
And I can see that one. Wow. That's how. Yeah, that's generally how they're done. And I'm still, again, these are things I'm playing. These are things I'm playing with because, well, first of all, this house doesn't have a lot of wall space for hanging stuff, but so I have stuff in rolls all over the place that I do artist proofs, like in rolls, as you can see, just junk all over this room,
That's a proper artist studio, don't worry.
It's kind of where I shoot, and just, it's just a mess. But that's, yeah.
We love that. We love to see the real thing.
And the exercise machines in here too in this room.
Good. We're good. You're looking after yourself during a pandemic.
Yes. Drinking too much.
We did see the very comprehensive bar when you went downstairs.
Oh, did you? Yeah, okay. Well, no secret there.
No secrets. We know what you were doing while you were quietly doing a Brenda down in the corner, sitting there quietly. So I love the way that you frame those edge to edge. So it's the minutest. Is it like a frame on the very edge, or is it on a kind of panel that you've got in?
Well, it's on a panel. It's on those are on aluminum panels, and then it's got a sort of a frame that hangs it, behind that. The problem is that's part of the reason I want to move to Diasec is they'll be less delicate because the problem is now it's all white gloves. You can't move these things around without wrecking them, and that's just not great for trying to show them outside the in other places. Now the pandemic now is preventing some of that anyway. But I'm trying to experiment with what's the best way to get them so they can travel a little better because right now they're very delicate and that's not practical in terms of showing.
No, so you've been showing just in the US, or have you shown anywhere else in the world?
It's just in the US, but it's also that now what's happened is even the shows are all canceled, so that the few pieces that I would have here and there, they're not in any places. The shows are canceled. And it was only group shows. I still haven't found a place where I've had a great deal of success with people wanting my work and looking at it and putting it in magazines, et cetera, and then in shows, but then getting postponed. But I still haven't found a niche or a gallery or a representation or some place where I can say, okay, this works for me and works for my work. So that's part of the reason I'm here.
Yeah. And in America, so here in the UK, we have lots of art societies and for particular types of work. So you'd have the societies that would take your work would be associated with photographers, but also with print making as well, because it is printmaking. And then we have the Royal Society of British Artists, and we have lots and lots of different societies and open calls where you can submit to, etc. Do you have that in the US?
Not in the same way, no. I mean, it's kind of like, I'm part of, there's a gallery down in Carmel, not too far from here, that I'm sort of a member of and, part of. And so that's more like group show kinds of things. I'm sure there are societies. I just don't have access to them. I mean, or,
yes, because that's how you would get your work shown in the UK.
Yeah.
And that's how a gallery would happen upon you. And I think your work is stunning, and I think that there would be many a gallerist who would be very happy to take that work on and show it. It's just a case of how you get that over here, and as you say, you can send it in rolls. So it's submitting to open calls in the UK and in Europe that would get you that option, and definitely framing. Working out your framing so it's not fragile. So because you've got the beauty of no glass, so it's not going to, that's always been an issue for me with people shipping their work from anywhere, is it arrives and the glass is broken. It's just a quintessential thing that happens all the time.
There was a show that I got into in Milan, and they, again, didn't do the actual show, so it was online. And I was, we're can't travel right now, but this was sort of before that, and then they just canceled it. I was going to, just go and print there. And not even, and then in the case of the UK, one of the reasons I even am interested in this organization is typically I'm in London about three times a year. So just for either for work or for, happen to go through for, whatever. So we've spent a fair amount of time in London for the last 2 or 3 or even more, 4 or 5 years. So to me, then I would either just locally print and then do it that way, as opposed to trying to ship it from here.
I think that is absolutely the best way, because otherwise you've got all the issues of customs and everything as well. But printing here, yes, there's many a good printer, and I would suggest you, in the first instance, you speak to people like Richard Heaps, who was one of the people that we interviewed on day one of this
I remember him,
because he's shown in Milan, he's shown all over Europe, and he's definitely been through some of the same kind of things that you've been through. And then there are a lot of artists that I can see your work would work very well with alongside in exhibition. And once we get back into exhibiting again, the UK is absolutely a cultural hub, and there is lots and lots of opportunities here for you. And as I say, I don't think that your work would struggle to get into any of those, because it's conceptual, which the UK market loves. It's unusual. You've got a USP. It's something that's quite different. So yeah, I would be very positive about your opportunities getting into galleries, and then getting further on into, there's lots of self-represented shows as well. So if you timed yourself coming here when there was an other art fair on, for instance, or there was a fresh art fair, you can actually self-represent. So no, there's lots of things that you could do. And I think this is turning into one of my mentoring sessions. So we need to do that separately, because there's lots of things that we can do. But people have got questions, so I think we'll go on to questions. And I think it's great for people to hear your questions about how to exhibit, etc., and how to get your work out across the world, because lots of other people will be having those thoughts as well. So I think it's a really viable and important conversation. So Griselda is saying, I understand these are prints. It feels as if they are one-offs or should be individual images. Is that what you intend, or have you produced them as editions? Very good question, Griselda.
Well, this is the thing I struggle with. I think I mentioned this before. There's a similar look and feel, but I struggle with this, trying to put together a string of 6 or 10 that actually are thematically the same, because I don't work that way. For me to work that way feels like it gets constrained. Now that one piece, that one sort of colorful piece you showed in the beginning, with the rainbowy kind of colors, there's another companion piece to that, but there's only 2, and that sort of are thematically the same. So I have a hard time, because like I said, when I shoot, I can't consistently get 10 pieces. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, I think what she's actually asking you is slightly different to that. I think what she's saying is, you produce one piece. Is that you sell it as a one-off and you never sell that piece again, or is it that you will do, like a printmaker, I will do 20 of these?
Well, I'll do an edition, and then a small edition. Yes, that's my intent.
Yes,
and not as one-offs. I'm sorry. Okay, I didn't misunderstand the question.
No, but I think answering the other way was really interesting as well. So we got 2 for the price of 1 on that answer, because I was interested in the thematic, and I think. Yes, because you're not doing any manipulation in the art post-production. It will be very difficult to create works that sit in a series, and galleries are very up for that. They want to be confident that they're going to get something similar, and they want to be able to put up a show that will hang as a curator. We want to make it look like an intelligent hang that people who come to view can understand it, but that's not insurmountable. No,
and also, interestingly enough, that other piece, the rebound piece, which is sort of that veiled piece, there are like 5 or 6 in that are very similar to each other. So if someone was interested in that, with slight variations in color and slight variations in cropping, etc. So it's not impossible. It's just not my normal way of working.
No, and I think Annie's work as well. I think Annie's had some of the struggles that you've had, and I think a dialogue there would be very interesting. Okay. She's asking, have you considered projecting your work? And as a filmmaker, I think that this will resonate. So it is active light rather than printed.
Yeah, actually, there was a show that I applied for. I'm going to say Helsinki, but I don't think it was. And I think that, and I don't know if I ever heard back, I'm not quite sure, but their thing was projected, and huge, and I was actually happy about that. So that I would definitely consider that, depending on what the venue was and where it was. Yeah. Nope, I can't hear you for some reason. Can you hear me still? I can't.
Sorry, I put myself on mute because I like to hear, and then I sometimes forget that I put myself on mute so that you got the pure sound when you're talking. Everyone's saying about the fact that your work is very, it resonates, and it would sit beautifully alongside Hildegard Pax's glass work, and I totally agree. Okay. Have a look at her interview. It's just there's a lot of crossover, and I think if you were looking to exhibit, and because you can't be confident that you can get 5 or 10 pieces in a series, to pick a few people who you could work with, who it would make an intelligent exhibition, is a very good idea. So have a look at her one as well. Her Image Heaps.
I think I have looked at her work, but I will go back.
Yeah. I think you and I will book up a one-to-one mentoring afterwards, because I think, there's lots more in that conversation. And Edith asks, how about the Affordable Art Fair in New York? Have you ever been in that?
The Affordable
Art Fair in New York. I don't know whether.
No, I haven't. I just got into a show with New York Arts, and again, they canceled the show in New York, and they're going to put a bunch of my pieces up on their website for the next 6 months. But no, I don't. The Affordable Art thing, I don't know.
Okay, so that's another one that we need to have a conversation about, because once you get into this, there's a circuit. It's a bit like everything, isn't there? It's a circuit, and once you get into the circuit, you get into the tribe, and you start to understand what's available to you. There's so much out there for you to access, and I'm sure that once you get onto a roll, you're a very intelligent, very organised business and lecturer. You'll work it out, and we can definitely help you with that.
Good.
I
Good.
have loved seeing your work, and I now understand it so much better. I was really drawn to it when it came through on the application.
Good, thank you.
Now hearing what's behind it, and hearing that it's not post-production and it's all done in the camera, which is something that is very much something I hold close to my heart, that I do everything in the camera. It's got even more power and potential behind it. So that's been brilliant, David. I wonder if Brenda is still sober. Let's have a look. Is she still sober and with us? Are you there, Brenda? She's disappeared, look. We can't see her anymore. She's obviously gone off for that gin and tonic. But thank you, Brenda. I'm sure she'll appear back here later. And thank you so much, David. It's been absolutely fascinating, and it's so lovely to have someone, talking to us from San Francisco and showing us around your home and your studio as well. It's been great. So tomorrow we have Felicity Flutter, who is an SGFA as well, drawing and uses watercolour, and we have Frances Featherstone. Again, I don't know how we ended up with FF and FF. That was just randomly happened. And Frances was one of the weekly winners on the lockdown Sky Portrait Artist. So that's going to be really interesting to hear how that all went on. And so we'll look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow. But thank you again, David. And you and I will catch up separately after this. All right. Bye for now, everyone. All right. See you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.